Hello there, good evening, and welcome to another edition of A Political Scope. I have with me in studio this evening the Honorable Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs, Anil Nandalal. Minister, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
We are continuing our discussions, of course, with a focus on the 2015 general and regional elections. Um, from a legal standpoint, I want us to examine in detail the Commingsburg Accord, which basically established the coalition of the APNU AFC for the upcoming elections. Starting off, first and foremost, your view in a general sense of the coalition. Of course, we're going to get into the legal arguments in a bit.
Well, the coalition is essentially a merger of the two major opposition parties in one political amalgam with the expectation and intention of competing against the People's Progressive Party Civic at the next elections. I believe that those who are the intellectual authors and designers of this arrangement see it as the vehicle by which the PPPC can be defeated at the next general and regional elections. I have no doubt that prominent in their consideration was the fact that together the two parties received more votes together at the last general elections, and were they in an alliance then, they would have secured the government at the November 2011 polls. I believe that it is their calculation that all things being equal, they would be able to replicate that performance, and that is the expectation, I believe, which is driving them in this new arrangement. Um, what I believe they failed to recognize is the fact that the whole is not, the sum of it, the parts is not always equal to the whole. So there is no guarantee that, in fact, there is very little evidence to suggest that the two parties coming together can produce the same results that they would have been able to produce and actually produced at the last elections. So I think those, I believe, in my humble view, are some of the general and more specific considerations that would have inspired and influenced the formation of this coalition.
But how realistic it is? If you're to take the 2011 elections, for example, there are persons who would have left the APNU, PNC, and voted for the AFC, for example, because they saw the AFC as an alternative. Likewise, a few persons who would have left the PPP and supported the AFC, and vice versa with the PNC, APNU persons who would have left the AFC and supported the APNU. Now you're bringing them back together. Could that result possibly in a deflection of votes?
Well, obviously, in the estimation, in the calculation, and in the analysis of those who are the intellectual authors of this pact, reasoned it differently. They obviously are of the view that at a minimum, the two parties merging together will yield at a minimum the same results. At a maximum, they will do better. That is obviously the thinking, hence the arrangement.
Let us talk a little about the Commingsburg Accord that established this coalition and the legality with regards to this, first and foremost. And I want us to talk a little later in terms of how the distribution of power, as is outlined in that agreement.
Well, the Commingsburg Accord, based upon what has been published of it publicly, is essentially an agreement between the two political parties. It has no foundation in law. It is not grounded in the Constitution. And as I go on, I will demonstrate how indeed it can be viewed as a subversion of the Constitution. Um, the whether the whether it will bear the anticipated fruits will depend on two things. One, its terms and conditions, like any agreement, and secondly, the character, personality, credentials, willingness, determination, commitment of those who are part of it. Those are the factors that would ordinarily determine whether any arrangement will work. What is worrying, though, about the Commingsburg Accord is the way that two parties have come together and unilaterally decided that they will essentially subvert the supreme law of the land, the Constitution. Because when one examines the accord itself and the way that it distributes power, the way that it shares cabinet responsibilities, and one examines those against constitutional provisions which actually prescribe what powers of the presidents are, what the powers of the prime minister are, how persons are appointed to the cabinet, then one gets a clear picture that those who are part of this accord either did so deliberately in disregard of the constitutional realities and the express provisions of the Constitution, or that it is not intended ever to work. In other words, it is a document that is intended to be a farce on the population. Why do I say so? I say so because the document itself declares that the presidential candidate will enjoy, if he becomes the president, reduced executive powers. The prime minister, if the elections are won by this grouping, will enjoy correspondingly expanded constitutional powers, and then another set of constitutional powers are going to be exercised by another grouping, and then the president's ability to appoint the prime minister and indeed his entire cabinet, those powers of the president and the wide discretion have been curtailed. Now, the Constitution of Guyana provides very clearly that the president is the supreme executive authority of Guyana, that he is the head of state, that he is commander-in-chief of the armed forces, and the Constitution vests in the president the freedom without any conditionality or circumscription, the freedom to appoint ministers of his choice, and indeed the prime minister and vice presidents, if he so wishes. These constitutional provisions have all now been made redundant by this agreement because they collide. The agreement, the accord, collides with the Constitution. Now it is trite constitutional law that the Constitution will prevail against any agreement or any statute. And that agreement or that statute, to the extent that it is inconsistent with the Constitution, is void ab initio and unconstitutional. So you have a serious conflict in this agreement itself.
But how can the president, let's say the president wants to hand over those responsibilities and or give that kind of power to the prime minister? What has to be done?
Well, the constitutional provisions that are relevant will have to be amended. Currently, that will require a two-thirds majority at a minimum. Any one of those provisions, at a minimum. Some of them may require referendum. Now, I don't know, I have not seen in the agreement any reference to constitutional amendments being effected to give effect to this accord. And in any event, one cannot predict that, assuming that the coalition wins the election, that they will enjoy a two-thirds majority. So that important question which you have raised has not been considered in the accord, if I'm to go by the express language. What that means is that the presidential candidate in the form of Mr. David Granger and the prime ministerial candidate in the form of Mr. Moses Nagamutu have essentially publicly declared that they are the two most powerful intended constitutional office holders. And they have declared to the nation an intention, a willingness, and a preparedness to violate, to flout, and to subvert the Constitution. Each one of them, beginning with the president, will be required to take an oath of office should they win the elections. That oath of office binds them to uphold the Constitution of the land. But they have bound themselves to another agreement that is violative and in conflict with the Constitution.
But the opposition is dominated with lawyers. How could they get to a point like this?
Well, I can cite so many constitutional and legal violations which have taken place in the 10th Parliament, notwithstanding the presence of so many lawyers in the opposition, that it would appear that the presence of so many lawyers is a non sequitur to what actually unfolds, because you have two important aspirants, or rather two aspirants for the two most important constitutional offices of the land, holding up an agreement that binds them together, which agreement is violative of the Constitution. In other words, these two gentlemen are telling the nation that we intend to violate the Constitution. We intend to subvert the Constitution. Despite what the Constitution says about what the powers of the president are and what the powers of the prime minister are, we will disregard those constitutional provisions and we will bind ourselves to this arrangement. It's either that or it is silently agreed by these two individuals and their respective groupings that this agreement is a farce and that it is never intended to be followed. And personally speaking, I am more attracted to that view that it is a farce. Because when one examines the agreement itself, then one is more likely to conclude that the thing is a facade, it's a sham. And I can highlight some examples. Firstly, you have the president who is prepared to give up executive powers. You have a prime minister and give that powers over to the prime minister. So you have a prime minister who will enjoy expanded powers. Then when you look at the respective political strength of the two major political parties in this union, you find that the strength of the PNC overwhelms that of the AFC. But when you examine what the AFC gets out of this political accord, it far outweighs their political strength. For example, let me quickly mention some. We are told that the prime ministerial candidate, which will come from the AFC, will enjoy this great expanded constitutional role and powers. The AFC will get the head of the presidential secretariat position. The AFC will get the powerful Ministry of Home Affairs, the powerful Ministry of Agriculture, the powerful Ministry of Natural Resources. Those are the most powerful ministries in any government. In addition to that, they will get two vice presidents. In addition to that, they are being guaranteed 12 seats in the National Assembly. The AFC at its best got 7 seats at the last elections. I don't know by what stretch of imagination they could have gotten 5 more seats. This accord gives them 5 seats. The PNC by itself has been able to deliver 26 seats by itself. 26 seats on its own strength in previous elections. Here they are giving 12 seats. On the last occasion, they gave 5 seats to the other members of APNU. The PNC delivered 5 seats to the Justice for All, 1 to the Justice for All party, 2 to the WPA, 1 to the
National Front Alliance.
National Front Alliance. These are political parties that cannot get a seat in the parliament. So the PNC just gave them 5. Now we are told that the PNC will give AFC 12. Now, as I predict, they will lose the elections. And the AFC will get 12 seats.
So in essence, the AFC is not required to do so much of work, whether or not they earn 1 seat at the elections, they are guaranteed 12.
They are guaranteed 12. And that is why the founder leader of the AFC was quoted in the newspaper, Mr. Raphael Trotman, the Speaker of the National Assembly, well, former Speaker, as saying that the AFC got much more than it bargained for. Obviously.
But is this thing realistic? Do you think the PNC being one of the major parties in this entire coalition here, do you think it's realistic? Do you think they're being honest with the supporters, especially of the AFC, with regards to giving all of this to a party which essentially earned 7 seats at the last elections and can bring just about that or even less?
That is the point I am making, that I am attracted to the view that this accord is a fraud and a farce.
Fraud from whom?
A fraud on the Guyanese people and a farce. And it is never intended to be enforced or executed. because it is not in keeping with real politics.
You have the view that the AFC supporters, or those who supported the party in 2011, bearing in mind the two together would have been able to together have 31 would have had 31 seats in the 33 seats in the National Assembly. Do you think, in your view, the agreement may be targeting AFC supporters to say, hey, if you come here, this is all of this
I
for you?
I think that the agreement is designed to induce a particular section of the population, to induce them to give their votes to the alliance. And that is the fraud to which I make reference. Um, but there is another component of it that we must examine also, and why it, in my humble view, it will not work. Remember, I spoke about the terms of the agreement, and then I spoke about the personalities involved, the players that are involved, because that is an important component in determining whether an agreement will be actually enforced in practice. And when you examine the record of the PNC had coalitions before. They had coalitions with the UF in 1964. It did not work. It lasted a few years, and uh, the leader of the PNC at that time, Mr. Forbes Barnum, made a public declaration that the PNC will never enter coalition arrangement ever again. Persistently, during its time in government, it rejected all efforts at any coalition politics. On the contrary, it kept itself in power by rigged elections and used authoritarian methods, used instrumentalities like the army to keep itself in power. It resorted to violence to keep itself in power. So this is not a party that is rooted in an ideology, a history, and a philosophy to sheer power. That's the first thing. Secondly, you have um, even out of government, you have the PNC's own internal politics. Every one of their congresses, even the last one, August of 2014, was marred with allegations of rigged elections, padding of the list, um, disenfranchisement of large sections of the membership of that party, leading um, political figures in that party came out and made very damaging statements about the internal democratic process of the party. So you have a political party both in government and whilst it has been out of government that has a long history and tradition of not being democratic and being authoritarian, even in its own political structure and electoral process. So you have that on the one hand. On the other hand, you have the Alliance for Change, a party that came out in 2006 with certain fixed and publicly declared principles that were said to be the cornerstone upon which the party is built. For example, they say that they are going to be a third force. They are going to be this new political culture that they want to bring to Guyana. And that is how they explain the symbol of a key to open Guyana's future, to unchain the people of Guyana from the politics of the PNC and PPP, a party that will never collate with the PPP or the PNC, a party that will provide a new breath of fresh air and breeze blowing through the democratic channels of our country. Those were the high, very idealistic principles upon which that party was founded. You have seen now that all of that have been thrown through the window by simply an invitation extended by the PNC to join. The lure of power.
But the AFC also had said continuously over the past maybe the past 3 years or so that it will not it will not collate with any political party.
They have said so over the last 3 or more years incessantly. So much so that just 1 month or so before the accord was actually signed, Mr. Ramjatan, the leader of the party, said that if they collate with the APNU, the AFC would be dead meat. That is his exact words, dead meat. And you have seen that all of those political public declarations have just been thrown aside. And as a result, you have seen a continuous exodus from the party of certain outstanding members at the level of the leadership, including the party's founding general secretary, who said that the party has sacrificed all its political ideals. So that is one. Two, you also have in the AFC a party that is embroiled in internal wranglings. Now, publicly, this is a party that championed the cause or causes of transparency, of good governance, of accountability. And as their leaders keep resigning, there is one common allegation that each of these persons have been making, dating back to 2012 with a gentleman from Berbice named Hasif Yusuf, and the latest one being Balwant Prasad. All of them have made the allegation that there is no accountability in that party, that there is no record of monies that are received by the party, that the party acts in a high-handed manner, that there is no consultation. For example, Mr. Nagamoto was made its presidential candidate without consultation from the membership. Now, this is not me who's saying so. These are people who have left the AFC and have said this. They have also said that the accord and the coalition was entered into without any consultation and input from the membership, that the party is being hijacked by 4 or 5 named individuals. I say all of that to deal with the quality of the players who are part of the coalition. I say that to demonstrate that they have never, on both sides, demonstrated pro-democracy tendencies. They have not demonstrated that they are bound by any set of principles that they change to suit the political exigencies of the time, that their dominant consideration is a quest to hold the reins of governmental and political power. You will note that during the 2 or 3 weeks of intense negotiations behind closed doors between the AFC and the APNU, we were getting a daily dosage of those secret talks being made public in the newspapers. And you will observe, and I hope that the people of Guyana would have observed, that not a single disclosure was made during that 2 or 3 weeks period to tell the nation that the coalition were discussing policies that will improve the people lives of this country, policies that will advance our economic progress, policies that will uh, address poverty alleviation, poverty that will address our young people not being able to get jobs, policies that will ensure that we attract investments, policies that generally will improve the welfare of our people. Not a single disclosure came out of those talks in connection with these vital matters of
But
national interest.
was that necessary? If I should ask, was that necessary at that stage, or is that something that could come?
It must be necessary. You must all that was being discussed based upon what was being leaked out of the secret talks was who will get what position, who will be president, who will be prime minister, who will be vice president, who will be
But you're talking about the issue of vice president. Do we, as a country, as a small country like Guyana, do we need a cabinet that is so top heavy?
let me I will get to that, but I just want to conclude the point that instrumental in any accord that is truly intended to advance the welfare of Guyana must necessarily talk about those matters, must talk about how we will improve the economy. And it cannot be where do we stand as a collective on these national issues. It cannot merely be an engagement to apportion spoils and ministries and who will get what position. It cannot be. So that ought to inform the population in terms of what the priority of this alliance is. You have rightly asked me whether we as a nation can afford these vice presidencies and excesses. These are people, both sides, both the AFC and APNU, every single day in Guyana. You pick up some newspaper or you turn on a television channel and they speak about good governance. They speak against extravagant spending. They speak about accountability. They speak about good governance. And here it is. The first opportunity that they get, they speak about a cabinet that is bloated, that has vice presidents with no defined portfolio, but simply the creation of vice presidential positions to satisfy political, the sharing of political spoils. That is all those vice presidents are supposed to do, as to how we will distribute offices. All right? So, the point I want to make is that this, and I've said it so many times, when you assess their conduct in the 10th Parliament, that what their priority remains is government. That is all that they want. Political power. It matters not. Everything that they are saying, all the positions and postures that they are adopting about good governance, about accountability, and about transparency, when you look at how they conduct themselves within their own political party, those principles do not apply. They have no application. And when together, in an amalgam that they are forging, you find again that these principles play no part. It is as if these principles do not apply to them. All right? It applies to some other people. But good governance and accountability and so on do not apply to them, because they have refused to take a position in terms of campaign funds type of legislation. in each of their political camps, you have had allegations running right across their structure from top to bottom of authoritarianism, of rigged elections, of lack of financial accountability, missing monies not being accounted for that is received from the diaspora and elsewhere. So, in conclusion, those are some of the reasons when one examines the persona of the players involved in the arrangement. Those are some of the reasons why I believe that the accord will fail. Remember, I divided my arguments in two camps. One, I dealt with the content of the agreement, and I highlighted what, in my humble view, are some of the deficiencies that will make it impracticable. And then, on the other hand, I outlined the reasons why the persona that are engaged in this exercise will cause it to fail.
You spoke, and in conclusion, you spoke about the whole issue of the agreement itself may intend to, it's a farce. Having explained and having examined what you've just discussed here with us, what would you say to Guyanese who are preparing, who are, you know, maybe those who are still to make a decision as to which side should they go? What will you say to them with regards to this coalition, which seems to be promising, you know, lots of beautiful things? Should they get into power, what will you say to Guyanese who might be tempted by those promises?
I will say to Guyanese what they already know, that the People's Progressive Party Civic Administration has a track record of progress, and we have transformed the Guyanese economy and the lives of the Guyanese people over the last 22 years. And you can point to any sector, be it the agricultural sector, the education sector, the health sector, the housing sector, and you will see the transformational hand of the PPP Civic Administration at work. The Guyanese people are comfortable with the People's Progressive Party Civic Administration. We are the known, and we have a track record, and we have touched the lives of Guyanese from every walk of life in this country. Every walk of life, from one end of Guyana to the other end. Every Guyanese who want to be objective can point to something in their street, in their village, in their community to show the transformational developmental hand of this government. On the other hand, you have the amalgamation of two parties, the merger of two parties. One that has been in government and rigged elections in Guyana to stay in power, brought a country that was identified to be the breadbasket of the Caribbean, brought that country from that high position to bankruptcy, being the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, second to Haiti. In the meanwhile, destroying every single thing, every single sector of the economy. And to keep itself in power, was prepared and has been implicated in various allegations of thuggery, of murder, of assassination, of political opponents and citizens alike. That is the record of the PNC. On the other hand, you have the AFC, made up of some persons who have come from the PNC and come from the PPP, who are bitter and who feel that that Guyana owes them, that the people of Guyana owes them, and therefore they should enjoy government. When you look at their own political existence and their own political operations within their own parties, they do not stick by any principles. The very thing that they speak about publicly, they do not practice it privately in their own political party. And there are so many examples of that. They are not in this thing for the long haul. They are here to try their hand and see whether they get political office. Their vision is short term. They started as a long term. When they spoke about being the third force, etc., they have obviously abridged that. And they are now to see what they can get in this short term arrangement. I suspect that when they lose the elections, we will see the back of the AFC, or at least, at a minimum, the top membership will disintegrate. They will go back to political wilderness. And those are the two alternatives. So the choice is so simple. You have security, you have progress, you have track record, you have development, you have people who you know, you have people who you can trust. On the other hand, you have people who have impoverished this country, and you have another set who apparently are prepared to do anything to get their hands on the reins of government.
Honorable Anand Landla, Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs, I want to thank you very much for joining us today.
It has been my pleasure.
Okay, our discussions were centered on the Cummingsburg Accord, whether or not it can really work. I want to thank you very much for being part of this program. We'll have a good rest of the evening.